Shalom, friends. Today I'm moderating this webinar from California, so it's good morning here. But to our friends in Israel, good evening, and everything in between. Wonderful to have all of you together. I assume more will be joining us. Many more have registered, and as in the past, assuming that the recording will work out okay, we'll be sending out the recording in a few days. I am grateful, as always, to our co-sponsors, RUACH Hiddush, Rabbis and Cantors for Religious Freedom and Equality in Israel. And I see Rabbi Neil Gold from our executive committee. There may be others. I can't see everybody that's on the, I only see a partial gallery. There may be others, and JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, and I think that both Judge Peter Buxbaum and Mark Enshen intended on being with us, but there may be others, and the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. It's a particular pleasure to have quite a number of colleagues, rabbinic colleagues, I don't know about legal colleagues, but rabbinic colleagues on this call, rabbis, professors, and people who clearly have joined us, registered for this webinar, either because of the topic or because the speaker is Rabbi Professor Dalia Marx. Both are as appealing and compelling, and therefore really only a few words may be in place to introduce Rabbi Dalia Marx. She's not only a friend, but really a renowned scholar in the area of Jewish liturgy that is sought after around the world and speaking around the world and writing about Jewish liturgy, and highly regarded. And for those who are from overseas, I will only add a word that that probably very few people have done as much as Dalia did to raise the profile of Reform Judaism in Israel. Her ascent to prominence and the growing interest that the media has in hearing a liberal, feminist, creative interpretation and presentation of Jewish liturgy, holidays, has brought Dalia to be exposed to the public in Israel practically every week, and definitely on the holidays and in between. So all of us who are committed to and interested in Jewish pluralism owe a debt of thanks to Dalia, who has made a tremendous combination between the area of scholarship and the outreach to the Israeli public in terms of presenting what I usually refer to as it ain't necessarily so, namely presenting a face of Jewish progress from the perspective of liturgy, of holidays, of rituals, that practically, frankly, no one else can. So we are grateful to you, Dalia. And before I turn the microphone over to you, I just want to use the opportunity for, a pitch. And the pitch takes sharing my screen. And in order to share with you this wonderful product of Dalia's popular presentation of her scholarship, and the CCAR press has recently published an English translation of her very popular book, published by probably the most popular publishing house in Israel, which in English is called From Time to Time, Journeys in the Jewish Calendar. It is a treasure trove of materials on every aspect of the Jewish calendar. And I think, in all fairness, since the Jewish catalog, there hasn't been anything like it. So anyone who is looking for insights, for inspiration, as we move through the Jewish calendar from a pluralistic, progressive, creative perspectives, there is no better place than Dalia's book, From Time to Time. And if you look at the chat, I posted the link to the CCAR press page that would enable you to order her book. Highly recommended, very popular in Israel, very helpful to everyone who is interested in Jewish lore, in the Jewish calendar, in the spirit of Israel's and Jewish holidays. All right, without further ado, let me go to our topic. And Dalia, the microphone and the shared screen is yours. Sorry, one more word. Anyone who wants to make a comment, ask a question, use the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and when Dalia finishes her introduction, we will present to her, I will present to her some of the questions and comments, and we will have a chance for an exchange.
Thank you very much for this generous, probably too generous introduction, Rabbi Regev. Shalom, morim, rabbanim, chaverim, chaverot, rabot. Good to be with you. Chodesh Tov, happy new month. Today begins the month of Nisan. It's the month of freedom and liberation, and may it be a month of freedom and liberation to all those who need to be liberated and have freedom. There is a say that when the cannons are rumbling, the muses fall silent. That's based on Cicero. But in fact, times of distress and times of big challenge, times of catastrophe, times of unpredictable calamities often yield great amount of liturgies and rituals. And the current situation that we are at since October 7th is no exception to the rule. In fact, I don't think that we ever had such a unbelievable amount of creativity from all segments of the Israeli society, not only those who are considered religious, but very, very wide and very broad creativity that is not just artistic, but explicitly liturgical. I myself collected almost 300 prayers, liturgical hymns, supplications, tchinot, all kinds of liturgical statements or responses to the situation. And today I would like to share a few with you. Most of them are not translated to English yet, so we had to choose texts that are translated. And I think, so we will see a few examples, and I'll try first to do some sort of typology of the types of prayers and rituals that we have. And I chose for today's presentation the picture of the Anones that represents the kibbutzim in the south, in the Negev, western Negev area. So when I think about it, I want to begin with some distinctions. This is a tentative and first kind of list, but I'm working on it and I have to reshape it. And so if you have ideas or if you have comments, I'm very, very happy to hear. So we should distinguish between prayers that are a part of what we call tfilot hakeva v'achova, the fixed and obligatory prayers from the Siddur, and special services, ceremonies, occasions that are meant just to commemorate or to relate to the situation that we're in. That's one distinction. The second distinction is between texts that are composed during a crisis, really as it happens, as it unfolds, and texts that are written from a distance, whether a temporal distance or geographic distance. And in our tradition, we have both. I think what is special about the situation now is the immediacy. Part of it has to do with the digital revolution, that it's very easy to not only to write, but to spread and to share everything that you wrote with other people, and then people read it and they use it or revise it or write in its influence. And we see a great variety of writing during the situation. And of course, everything we say now is tentative because we are in the situation. And some more responsible assessments will have to take place after fact, and may the day come as soon as possible. So that's the first two things. The second is between spontaneous, personal texts and official authoritative responses. So sometimes you see people stand, teachers in the classrooms, rabbi in the congregation, just saying something, especially if something happens, we hear something on the news, and people just say something from the bottom of their heart, not necessarily prepared or written or organized in a certain way. And sometimes you have statements that are well thought through and prepared in a more careful way, and they are carried out in public. So I think we should distinguish between the two. And then we should distinguish between texts produced to be recited once and prayer or petitions or piyutim, liturgical hymns, that are meant for regular recitation. Some of the examples that we can think of is liturgical responses to the crusade. There's massacres in Europe at the beginning of the second millennium. Some of them were immediate responses that were said in a situation, and that's it. And some of them were created to be recited in the synagogue every Shabbat or once a year, or when you have a Yizkor service. So we have to distinguish between these two kinds. Another distinction is between the initial usage of a text and its renewed use in different contexts. Sometimes the text is written for a specific situation or a specific context, but the way it is used is in a different way, and we will see an example for that in a second. And then, of course, maybe I should have started with this. There are different theological and ideological responses or approaches. There is a very different approach in many traditional writings, accepting our guilt. Lecha Adonai tzedakah velanu boshet hapanim. We are shamed. We have no merits, and therefore all the bad things happen to us, and we deserved it. As opposed to saying, no, we shouldn't. I mean, why did it happen? A much more defiant approach, and of course, everything that is in between. If the text has to do with asking for peace for the region or peace in the world, or something that has to do just with the state of Israel or just with Jewish people in the state of Israel. So you have different approaches, and we will see a little bit of that as we move along. And of course, there are different liturgical and literary genres. Sometimes we can talk about lamentations, and sometimes we can talk about eulogies, and sometimes we can talk about petitions, and sometimes we can talk about poems, and sometimes we can talk about texts that it seems like it's deliberately have no artistic form, but they're like sheer, pure outcry of people. So these are a few initial distinctions between different texts that are composed in the Jewish tradition as a response to catastrophes and calamities. Now, so there's another one. there's a distinction between prayers that are composed for, it's a little bit of a repetition of what I wrote before, but it's a different aspect, a different angle. Prayers that will endure and prayers that will be forgotten. Sometimes a prayer was written for a specific situation, but then it entered the life stream of the Jewish community, and they are recited again and again. I think Ava Rachamim, that is recited in traditional synagogues on many Shabbatot, is an example for that. Other texts that are sometimes even that are sometimes specific to the event can be treated a little bit as ephemeral literature. That's like the newspaper. It's the most important thing today, but tomorrow it's gonna fall out of. It's not anymore the most interesting things. And I would say that the less specific a prayer is, the better chances it has to enter regular use and enter the live stream of Jewish use. Now, in terms of the types of liturgical use, here I think we can think about three kinds of liturgical use, and I'm following here Dr. Susan Einbinder's categories, and she says the following. You could talk about, first of all, you have this Matir Asurim, God who frees the captives. This is a text that we find in the Tefillah. We find it in the Tefillah several times. In fact, we find it in the morning blessings. We find it in the verses of hymn for Shabbat, in Psalms. We find it in the Amidah, in the 18 benedictions. We find it in the Shema liturgy with slightly different wording. So it appears a lot in the liturgy, and we used to say it all the time. I mean, I used to say it all the time. I'm the prayer leader in my community for the verses of hymn, not because I like to be a prayer leader so much, but because that's the only way I make sure we begin on time. So I used to say this Matir Asurim, God who frees the captive, probably 4 times every Shabbat, and it was just one of these phrases you say during prayer. And all of a sudden, when October 7th happened, it became very prominent, and it became something that every time I say it with a special kavanah. And what you see here is a sticker that was produced. Unfortunately, I don't know who created it, so I cannot give a credit here. And it says Matir Asurim, God who frees the captive. But if you see in the yellow, it says October 7th. You know, in Hebrew, the dates are, the day are before the month. So the word Asurim is comprised of October 7th. So that's something that is to bring to mind how, even by people who are not necessarily shul goers or consider themselves religious, phrases from the liturgy enter the normal discussion, the normal rhetoric approaching the situation. So the 3 types that I'm talking about is reuse, revision, and adaptation, and new text. What do I mean by reuse? Reuse is taking a text that is in the liturgy and give it a new life, give it a new meaning, use it in a way that it was not done so before that. Revision and adaptation, and we will see an example for each one of the 2 examples for each one of them, as much as time permits us. And Uri, you will tell me when I need to stop. Texts that are in the liturgy, but they were revised or changed in order to address the current situation, and texts that are completely new and have no precedence. So let's see an example for the reuse. The reuse. And here we have the prayer of Achenu, and we say, of course, Achiotenu, our brothers and sisters, the entire house of Israel, who are in trouble and captivity, whether at the sea or on dry land. May Hamakom, may God have mercy on them and bring them out of troubles to salvation, from darkness to light, from captivity to redemption, now swiftly and in our time. And let us say amen. I plan to play it for you, but I don't know if we have the time for that, just to give you the sense of it, because it became very, very popular, especially with the special tune composed by the Cantor A.B. Rothenberg. And this is a text that is already in the prayer books, in the traditional prayer books. It is recited every every Torah service on weekdays. And when October 7th happened, I was actually in New York at that time. I started getting frantic phone calls from my colleagues saying, can it be that we did not include Achenu in our Siddur? I know I had the fortune to be one of the editors of Tfilat Ha'adam, the prayer of the human being. This is the Israeli Reform Siddur. And indeed, we did not include it because it was completely out of our radar to think that people can be taken in captivity the way it happened now. We experienced in the past soldiers being taken as prisoners of war, but not civilians. That was something that was completely not in our radar. And obviously, when I came back to Israel, I bought stickers and we printed the text on it and we put this prayer on our prayer books at Hebrew Union College, and I also sent it to my colleagues, just to show you that this is a text that is already in the liturgy, but now became so prominent and so important and so emotionally led. That's about the reuse of texts that are already around, but doing it in a new way. I'm moving to revision and adaptation. And here we can see many new Kaddish prayers that are composed addressing the situation. Many mourning prayers such as El Maleh Rachamim, God filled with mercy, with special insertion dealing with the situation of the massacre of October 7th and the war in Gaza. We can see all kinds of memorial prayers that are composed, and here I brought you two examples. One of them is a Misheberach prayer, and the Misheberach is a genre of prayers that can be recited for anything and everything during our services, normally, again, in the presence of the Torah, during the Torah service. And here you have a prayer written by Rabbi Chen Ben Or Tzfoni. I don't know if shall I just read it? May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, Rachel and Leah. May the one who answered Dinah in her torture, Joseph in prison, and Daniel in the lion's den, God of Abraham, the first who was willing to risk his life for the release of prisoners of war and hostages. Of course, it refers to his nephew Lot. May this God bless the hostages taken captive by, well, the Hebrew is much more, the Hebrew is much more poetic. May this God bless the hostages taken captive by our enemies and all those who are missing and unaccounted for, citizens, soldiers, men, women, children, who are imprisoned in grave danger. May it be your will, God of all, that they be released speedily and return to our land, to their families, and to their homes, safe and sound in body and spirit. And it continues, asking for power and hope to those who yearn for their return, and also to give their captives wisdom and compassion. And it continues with words from the tradition, right? Hamakom yirachem alehem, that's the prayer that we just read. And it ends with a verse from the prophet Jeremiah. Thus said God, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears, and for there is a reward for your labor, declared God. They shall return from the enemy's land, and let us say amen. כן, ויש תקווה לאחריתך, נאום אדוני, ושבו בנים ובנות לגבולם, ונאמר amen. That's text based on Jeremiah 31. Another text that I wanted to show you in this context is called Kinat Be'eri, the Lamentation of Be'eri. As you know, Be'eri is one of the kibbutzim that was severely suffered from the brutal attack of October 7th. And the text that I want to play to you is written by Yagel Harush, who's a musician of Moroccan descent. And since the whole thing began, he had a tune in his head. He says, he tells that I met with him and he told me that he had this tune in his head. The tune is of a liturgical lamentation from Tisha B'Av, from the 9th of Av, that is recited, the tune, not the words, in Moroccan communities on Shmini Atzeret. That's the day where it happened, the 8th day, the day after Sukkot. It is the Moroccan recite the prayer for rain according to this tune. And he says that one day he was making lunch for his children, and the words came to him, and he wrote it. He wrote it very, very close to the massacre, to the October 7th massacre, but he was reluctant to publish it. He felt that it may weaken the people instead of strengthening them. And he didn't know what to do. And then on the 30th day, on the Shloshim, he decided that it's time to publish it. And here are the lyrics. We will send them to you, I think, Nachon Uri. So I'll just read, if it's okay with you, I'll just read a verse in Hebrew, and you can see the translation in English, and then I want to play it to you to show you how it sounds. איכה בארי הפכה לקרבי, ויום מאורי הפך שחורי, והושחת כל פרי ונהפך שירי, איני נובעה מים מעומק שברי. So it's every verse ends with איני נובעה מים מעומק שברי. My eyes pour forth water from the depth of my brokenness. This is citing the book of Lamentation. And only the last verse is an optimistic verse, and it says, "Ve'ini hanovat tashke be'eri," and my eyes that pour forth will water be'eri. Because as you know, the word be'eri, has to do with well, my well, and therefore I think it's especially interesting. Oops.
Communicate in English easily.
Use
Grammarly and keep.
Okay. Therefore, Be'eri has also great symbolism in Jewish law. It's also one of the names of the Shekhinah. So he found it especially powerful to write the text on Be'eri. And let me share the sound with you a little bit so we can get the taste of it. רגע. Tell me if you hear it. Do you hear it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
ונהפך שירי, אני נובע מים מעומק שברי. איך התורה ערוכה וסדורה, וכל בערה
So you see, this is, I think, a very touching lamentation. You can hear how he uses the rhetoric and the words and the phrases from the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentation, and embed them with the situation of the massacre of October 7th, and with the music that is originally from Tisha B'Av, that is to say the day of the destruction, the day of the devastation, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, and also used on Shmini Atzeret in the supplication, in the prayer for rain. So far, let me just put on the website. So far, we saw two examples. Again, there's many more. I collected, as I said, about almost 300 different texts. But here, I just wanted to show you the great variety that we have here. So we saw texts that are traditional, but they have a new use after the event. And we saw a revision or adaptation of texts or styles of piyut, of liturgical hymns. And now let us go to new text, because the situation that we have in front of us requires or recalls new texts that are completely new. Yeah, and sometimes it's not, it can be somewhere in between, because there are many prayers for the state of Israel. We have an official prayer for the state of Israel, and we have a few more. I think Ellen asked about it before. I didn't bring you such a prayer, but many prayers for the state of Israel were created. So we can either see them as revision or adaptation of a prayer that is already there, or a completely new text. And here are two examples that I brought you here. So for the first one, do you see the text that I'm sharing, Uri?
Yes.
Okay. The first the title is a prayer and reflection by Rabbis Janet and Sheldon Murder, found in Mishkan HaNefesh, and it's actually, now that I see, it's a text that is based on a text that was already written, but it's a completely new text, I think. And it begins with the words Kol dmei achicha tzoakim elai min ha'adama. That's what God said to Cain after Cain murdered Abel. Your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. That's Genesis 4:10. And it goes like this: Creator of life, source of healing, grant peace in your great shelter of peace to our loved ones whose life had ended abruptly through an act of senseless violence. With sadness, I recall the joy that they brought into the world, those voices and faces we will never forget. May these precious memories console us. Let there be light to guide us, to guide our ways through the shadow of loss. We long with all our being for the end of baseless hatred, war, and violence. May the time come soon when no one will suffer or die at the hands of another. May our loved one's soul be embraced by you, free of pain now, held in tenderness and love. We will cherish forever these lives that are lost, blessing in the bond of life everlasting, blessing here and now. Blessed are those who give meaning to our lives. Holy and precious is the example they leave behind. We pray, may our sorrows diminish as we recall their strength. May their wisdom protect us and help us to live. May our grief be transformed into tremendous tenderness for those who are still with us. Now I think I need to apologize, because I put it in the wrong category. This is a text that's already existed. It was not written especially for the situation in October 7th, but it's been reused, and I just put it in the wrong category. But what you do have, you have many prayers that are written for the release of the captives, of the prisoners, of the hostages, and prayers that are asking for relief of suffering in general. I want to read you one prayer, one such prayer and it is composed by Rabbi Ofer Sabbath Beit Halachmi and translated by his wife, Rabbi Rachel Sabbath Beit Halachmi. I think he wrote it in Hebrew, but I brought it to you here in English. Our God, the one who raised Joseph up from the pit, be refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. That's Psalm 9:10. Send complete rescue and full redemption to those held in captive by enemy, and when possible, add names here. Strengthen their spirit and bring them our prayers that they be protected from all harm. Implant understanding in the heart of their enemy, that they may return the captives in wholeness of body and spirit. Grant wisdom to the Israeli Defense Forces, that they may rescue freedom for all captives without loss of life. Grant strength of spirit and courage of heart to all the sons and daughters of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, to release bonds of captivity and allow us all to live in freedom. And now this is a text that's based on Psalm 91. They shall call upon me, and I will answer them. I will be with them in distress. I will rescue them and honor them. So this is the text that you have here, and the text of Rabbi Ofer Shabbat Beit Halachmi also allude to a custom that we have in many synagogues these days, and that's to read the names of the hostages. In many synagogues, we read the names of the hostages, the whole list of now 133, it used to be more. As you know, it's done in different ways. Sometimes we read them and their first and last name. Sometimes we read the first name and the name of the mother and father. Sometimes we read it according to alphabetical order. Sometimes we read it according to the place that they were taken from. But this is based on an ancient minhag that we have already in Ashkenaz, right? Lechol ish yeshem, every person has a name. To read names of the deceased, especially deceased that lost their lives in acts of violence, in memorial services. Yeah, in these names are preserved in what you call in Ashkenaz memorbicher, yeah, memorial books. So you have that custom, and you have many other customs in many synagogues to write a special psalm, to read a special psalm, to read a special prayer. But here in this, here I wanted to show you new prayers that are composed specifically for the situation that we have here. We have prayers for the soldiers to fight fearlessly, but also carefully and mercifully against when it comes to civilians and people who are not involved as Hamas warriors. We have prayers that are composed for people who have the sacred and very difficult task to announce families about casualties. And you have all kinds of new prayers that are composed for the situation that we have now. And I chose to end with this field of Anones. It's an artwork by Avraham Peso, and he calls it Kibbutz Be'eri shall flourish again as the seeds of Anones. Right? And this is something that is very well known in the Israeli ear. Right? We talk about Red South. Every year, people go to the south to see the wonderful flourishing of the Anones. But this year, when we think about Red South, we unfortunately think about something else. And he's hoping, he's praying, he's making this supplication that the Be'eri or the Kibbutzim will flourish again, like the seeds of Anones. And here, I think you can treat it as a graphic prayer. So that's in a nutshell some sort of typology of different prayers that are composed to commemorate the situation that we're in. And if we have questions, I'm happy to try to address them.
Let me again invite you to write your comments or questions in the chat, and we'll present them to Dalia. And in the meantime, let me maybe ask two questions that come to mind. One is, what about Orthodoxy? We know that many years ago, one of the leading scholars and really giants of Orthodox scholarship, Professor Ephraim Elimelech Urbach, attempted with a group of modern Orthodox scholars and rabbis to slightly update the prayer on Tisha B'Av that had to do with the destruction of the temple following the Six-Day War, and he was met with wrath. There was no willingness to update even the most minute detail of the traditional liturgy. So what happens in Orthodoxy, to the extent that you know it? And the other thing is, you mentioned when we decided on the topic for this webinar, liturgy and rituals. Is there anything you can say about rituals that have been developed as a result of or in response to the massacre?
Wow, two really great questions. So with Orthodoxy, interestingly enough, the very small, minute changes that Urbach and Heinemann proposed are not observed by most Orthodox, maybe some modern Orthodox, but they are very well accepted in Reform liturgy. Yeah, so you know, we incorporated their proposals. I would say that in general, in Orthodox synagogues that I'm aware of, there are no changes within the statutory liturgy, but you have additions. So I know that in some synagogues you would say Avinu Malkenu, our Father, our sovereign, every day. Yeah, this is a text that normally is recited only on the 10 days of repentance and fast days, and now it is recited in many synagogues every day. This is a long text, not a very easy one, and it may be even surprising that in some synagogues it is even recited on Shabbat, right? You know, we don't recite it on Shabbat when Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, right? But now some authorities said that we have to recite it on Shabbat. So if this is an act of reform, maybe that can be interesting. What you do see in many more traditional synagogues is, as I mentioned before, psalms. So, for example, Psalm 130, that is also has to do with the high holidays and liturgy. Mima'amakim krati chaya, from the depth I call you God, and typically it is done in responsive reading. The prayer leader reads a line and the community repeats it. Or Psalm 121, that psalm that is also used in times of distress and catastrophe, and that also is recited when the entire congregation stands and the prayer leader sings a line and the community responds. Now you talk about rituals, not only texts. I concentrated here mostly on texts, but the interesting thing that I found since the whole thing began is that there are many rituals that are done in the streets, in the tent of the hostages in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem. In each one of them, there is a Kabbalat Shabbat ceremony. Yeah, the welcoming of Shabbat, which is not an obvious thing at all to use even this term Kabbalat Shabbat to convey the message. I had the difficult privilege to lead Kabbalat Shabbat in the hostages tent in Jerusalem this past Shabbat. It was very hard for me to think about the right voice that I need to use, right? Because this is definitely not a Kabbalat Shabbat in the religious sense of the word. This is not what you would do in a synagogue. But nevertheless, the phrase Kabbalat Shabbat and the marking of the Shabbat is something that is important in all these circles, including people who are very secular, even atheists. We had special Hanukkah candle lighting events. Now with the Pesach, there are all sorts of pre-seders that are done. Again, not necessarily traditional seders, but sitting together, discussing, contemplating on the return of the hostages and what do we want to say about it. So we have a lot of use of Jewish language in these public events, even if it's not traditionally religious, yeah. And the same with the Havdalah service, the service that we have at the end of the Shabbat. Now, every Shabbat night, many of us participate in demonstrations. This is not only from October 7th. It's been since January, since the beginning of this government. And we begin with a Havdalah service. And we stand there in the middle of the street and we do Havdalah, and people just, as you know, because you are part of it, people just wander in and they just enjoy, the singing and the spiritual experience there. There we do a traditional Havdalah. But people, I think, find it moving and they join us. So that's a little bit more about ritual. And I would say the reading of the names is also some sort of a ritual that is done in many places, not only synagogues. I hope this is an answer to your question.
Definitely is. Now, Rabbi Pamela Gottfried is asking you to post the Hebrew caption of Avram Pesser's artwork, the Darom Adom. And by the way, as Professor Marx mentioned, we'll be sending you the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation and the texts that Dalia used when we follow up on this webinar, along with the recording. Now, Alan mentions an angle that doesn't directly bear on your topic, but of course is important to mention. Alan Roscher writes that the Anu Museum opened a special exhibition that deals with October 7th, and the special music that's featured in it, in that exhibit, has to do with the October 7th massacre. Right. And of course, this is a whole additional chapter, the musical creativity among performing artists and writers, some that have sort of felt blocked in the ability to express themselves and to sing, and gradually have moved into the special spirit and the special response to the distress, and others who have very shortly after the massacre started responding in musical creativity. And
not just music, also graphic art, painting, drawing, photography,
definitely. And as you have shown, the whatever it's called, the use of the numeral 710 as replacing the Hebrew letters in Matir Asurim, I've seen other similar uses that sort of drive the message home. But with regard to the music, one of the things that many of you may already be aware of, if not all of you, is that something very unique happened in the hundreds of funerals that were, we were thrown into as a result of the scope of the massacre. And that is that performing artists who were particularly loved and listened to by the casualties came to the funeral and performed the song or the songs that the family and the fallen civilians and soldiers were fond of or were attached to. And this has become a most moving aspect of those funerals, numerous funerals. And in Israel, unlike the US, and we discussed it recently, the family, in the US, they do not display the funerals of casualties from the American armed forces, even when they fall in enemy land. In Israel, each and every funeral is at least briefly broadcast as part of the primetime nightly news and repeated at other times. And therefore, those performing artists that sing and the heartbreaking and painful realization of that, of the life that was lost, the richness of the life that was lost, and how it's conveyed in music is very much part of what the Israeli population is experiencing and exposed to on a daily basis. So that's another aspect of creativity and of rituals that have developed in following the massacre.
I want to add one point. This is absolutely right. The surge of creativity all around is tremendous. I wanted to add one point to what I said before about Orthodoxy, because I see Rabbi Shagos was mentioning it. There are many prayers written by Orthodox rabbis. She mentioned the chief Rabbi Lau, but there are many others, the chief IDF Cantor, Avamson, many others. But there are additions to the service. They don't replace any, or there are no changes within the liturgies. This is not what you were referring to as the Urbach suggestion after 67, to change, to make small revisions in the liturgy itself. But adding more prayers, this is something that we see quite a lot in all circles, right? Even either during the service or in the school system or other youth movements or other activities, yeah.
Now, Daniela Tuati is asking if there are already projects for the yortzeit of this awful, terrible attack. When do you think it would be commemorated? And what kind of prayers can we say? A special Yizkor or what? So there is already discussion, by the way, not only as to the date, but as to the name of the war.
Exactly.
So everything is tentative, but what can you enlighten us on with regard to the memorials?
So the memorials are, there were along the way already in the last 6 months, some points that we had to ask ourselves, how do we remember it? How do we remember what happened during Hanukkah, which among other things is a celebration of heroism, of military heroism? How can we reconcile the situation with the contents of Hanukkah? How can we reconcile the contents of Purim, which is a happy celebration, with what happened? How can we reconcile the celebration of freedom, which is Pesach, that we are approaching now, with everything that's happened? This, I can tell you that all rabbis I know are really pulling their hairs and trying to see how can we celebrate Pesach and at the same time commemorate it, the situation properly. And as I said before, I hope that by Pesach we can celebrate the return of all of them home and the end of the war and everything. But we don't know what will be the date. Yes, I assume, again, this is I'm basing it on the Memorial Day for Yitzhak Rabin, our murdered assassin, our prime minister who was assassinated. The state will mention Shmini Atzeret, right? That's the day where it happened, the Jewish day. The people will remember October 7th. The problem with Shmini Atzeret is that there is no educational system on that day. So we will have to see how it works. It will probably be after Sukkot, not before, because before Sukkot you have Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, and it's the beginning of the academic year. So I don't think it will be anything. But how are we going to celebrate Sukkot next year? How are we going to celebrate Simchat Torah, the joy of Torah? Because in Israel, Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah are on the same day. How are we going to celebrate? And that's a great challenge. I don't think we have an answer yet. And part of it has to do with where we are going to be in 6 months. And hopefully we will be in a much better place. But, that's a question, of course.
So Dalia posted, and for those who have good command of Hebrew, for the Red South art piece, the original Hebrew title is Be'eri od yifrach kezir'ei kalaniyot. A very upbeat and hopeful message. Rabbi Tamar Tati Shagas is commenting, asking, I'm thinking about women. This might be a unique time in terms of the women's situation, quote unquote, amount of captive soldiers, tragedy responders, and also rabbis, liturgists, musicians. Is there something you can say about that, namely the feminist angle of the topic that you were discussing?
Well, that's of course a whole discussion unto itself, but I can say that one of the things that my colleagues and I try very hard to teach all around Israel and beyond is that the value of freeing the captive, of Pidyon Shvuim, is not just a human value, it's also a Jewish value, and we have to keep it as a Jewish value. And when you look in rabbinic sources, you see special attention to the more vulnerable elements of society, that is to say, children and women. And of course, we talk about that, but of course, the situation of women in captivity is, what can I say? It's devastating no matter how you look at it. And I don't think that I know of any specific liturgical response to that. There are many poems written about women in captivity, but like liturgical per se, I'm not sure I know of anything like that. But yes, this is something that is very much in our conversations these days, and in the demonstrations and in the media. This is something that we think about a lot. Someone mentioned in the chat, and I'm sorry I cannot read and talk at the same time. If it was Hebrew, I could, but here I'm trusting you here, Uri. I just saw someone was writing that Shmini Atzeret, you have a Yizkor service. In Israel, Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah are on the same day, and we have Shmini Atzeret, Yizkor service. That's a day of emotional roller coaster. Nevertheless, it's it's a very packed day in Israel because it's two celebrations, two festival days crammed in one. It's the longest service in the year, probably more than Yom Kippur, maybe. And I assumed, I believe that we will have a Yizkor service, but I think it will also affect the way we celebrate the Torah on that day. We're gonna be celebrating the Torah, but it's not gonna be a full joy thinking about what happened.
We don't discuss politics in our webinars, but sort of politically oriented comment that I recommend you look at was posted by Rabbi Mark Lavine as to the fact that the US government does not want the funerals to be broadcast. And in a way, any such attempt, had it been tried in Israel, would have failed and be rejected, vehemently. But it certainly impacts on the public mood. But I think that having said that, it should also be noted that whereas you in the US and other parts of the world are privy to coverage of the destruction in Gaza and the human suffering in Gaza, the Israeli public is mostly exposed to property destruction and not to the human pain and misery. And that obviously has a lot to do with the same motivation that the US government may have had in deciding on the policy of broadcasting funerals. And as a matter of fact, in recent days in Israel has become a topic of some controversy because more Israelis are saying that the policy and the public rallying to a great degree is predicated upon not broadcasting the impact, the terrible impact in terms of human suffering within Gaza. But I will not say any more than that. All right. So Rabbi Karen Fox rightly summed up, and I'll get it, saying, many thanks. I appreciate the structural format and compelling presentation. Thank you. And she said it succinctly and accurately. Dalia, you have a unique talent to take complex, sometimes difficult to follow topics and bring them to life, and bring them to the popular level, as does your book. And again, I strongly recommend. In Israel, it has become a bestseller. I hope it is in the US as well, in the English translation and other English language countries. We now have Canadians on the call, and possibly other countries. So thank you. You've done a fantastic job. I know that you mentioned that there may be an article coming up in English. It'll be a while before it's published, but an article that addresses those issues, and when it is, we'll make reference to it in the Hiddush newsletter. And obviously, we recommend to people to take advantage of that. Is there any parting words that you want to share with us, Dalia?
Only that I hope to see you and everyone again soon in good health and good spirit, and may we meet again talking about peace and joyous things that happened in the state of Israel and beyond. And yes, I am visiting the States quite often now to present my book. I will be in June in Los Angeles and San Francisco, so maybe I'll see some of you. Thank you very much for being here, and may we all have Chodesh Tov, a good month of freedom and liberation to all. Toda rabba.
Thank you, Dalia. Chag Sameach. Thank you all for joining us. We will shortly announce the next webinar, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. And in the meantime, indeed, as much as we can celebrate Passover with renewed sense of commitment to and understanding of the value of freedom, let us do so. And just as in the heart of Pesach is bechol dor vador, in each and every generation, one must see oneself as if he, she have come out of Egypt. It's clear that for many years to come, if not forever, the sense of having lived through the October 7th massacre will live in the minds and the hearts of everyone who has experienced this time, and probably those around us, and whether we are able to convey it to the next generation remains to be seen. But these are very unique times, and the liturgical response and the ritual response is an integral part of indicating how unique these times are. So Chag Sameach, namely as merry and meaningful and joyous Passover as we can muster. I think, Dalia, you will probably be publishing or writing about Ma nishtana Pesach hazeh, specifically what new rituals and liturgy is proposed for Pesach because there is already some and there'll be plenty of it. We look forward to it and we'll be happy to distribute it and maybe invite you again to speak about that. So shalom, todah to all of you. Bye.